There is a painting in an attic locked away that no one is allowed to see. On the outside, a beautiful young man walks through the world untouched by time, charming everyone, aging not a day. But the portrait hidden upstairs grows uglier with every cruel thing he does, absorbing the consequences his face refuses to show. You have heard the premise of Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. What you may not have noticed is that you are living inside it. You have a public face that stays polished and a hidden portrait that records who you actually are. The only difference is that Wilde's character had to climb the stairs to see his. Yours updates in real time, and you have trained yourself never to look. Here is the strange thing about this 1890 novel. People remember it as a spooky story about a magic painting and a vain young man who sells his soul. But Wilde was not really writing about magic. He was writing about the split that opens up inside a person when the image they present and the self they actually are stop matching and then keep drifting further apart. He was writing about the cost of becoming a performance. And in 2026, when most of us maintain a curated public version of ourselves that we update daily for an audience, that split is no longer a Gothic fantasy. It is the default condition of being online. Let me reframe the book. The horror of Dorian Gray is not that his portrait records his sins. The horror is that his face does not. He receives the one thing we now all silently crave, a surface that never shows the damage, and it destroys him. Because the portrait was never a curse. It was the last honest thing in his life. It was the only mirror still telling him the truth about what his choices were doing to him, and his entire tragedy is that he could not bear to look at it. He would rather stay beautiful and lie than stay honest and grow. To understand why this matters, you have to understand the engine driving Dorian, and it is not vanity exactly. It is a worldview handed to him by a charming, poisonous mentor who convinces him that the only thing worth living for is the pursuit of new sensations, that beauty and pleasure are everything and consequences are for lesser people. Dorian swallows this whole. He builds his entire identity around how he appears and how he feels in the moment, and outsources his conscience to a canvas he keeps in the dark. Psychologists today would recognize the structure of this immediately. It is the gap between the self we perform and the self we actually live with, and research consistently finds that the wider that gap grows, the more anxious, hollow, and disconnected a person becomes. Now hold your own life up against that. Think about the version of you that exists in other people's feeds. It is, almost certainly, the best lit, best angled, most flattering edit of your days. The meals look better, the trips look freer, the relationships look warmer. Even your struggles, when you share them, are curated into something tidy and resolved. None of this is lying exactly. It is doing what Dorian did. It is presenting an unaging, unblemished face to the world, while the messier, truer portrait, the actual texture of your life, gets quietly stored somewhere you would rather not look. The difference is that Dorian had one painting. You may be maintaining several, one per platform, each demanding its own kind of perfection. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Dorian becomes addicted to the gap. The more flawless his public face, the more freely he behaves in private, because there are no visible consequences to slow him down. When your surface absorbs no damage, you lose the feedback that normally teaches you who you are becoming. This is the quiet danger of a life optimized for image. Not that you fool other people, but that you slowly lose the ability to see yourself accurately, because every mirror you own has been replaced with one that flatters. Wilde understood, more than a century before the front-facing camera, that a person who can no longer see their own portrait clearly is a person who has lost the instrument they need to steer. There is an old idea in Uzbek culture that a clean face means little if the heart behind it is dusty. The wisdom is simple and ancient and exactly Wilde's point. The surface is the easiest thing to clean and the least important thing to clean. We spend enormous energy on the face the world sees and almost none on the portrait in the attic, and then we are baffled when we feel like strangers to ourselves. The maintenance is going to the wrong place. So why can't Dorian just look at the painting and change? This is the deepest psychological insight in the book, and it is the one that should hit closest to home. Every time Dorian glances at the portrait and sees something worse, he doesn't reform, he doubles down. He hides it better, he blames the painter. He eventually decides that the painting itself is the problem, the accusation, the thing ruining his peace, rather than the behavior the painting is faithfully reporting. We do this constantly. When the honest signal arrives, the friend who tells us the hard truth, the quiet sense that something in our life is rotting, the comment that stings because it is accurate, we treat the messenger as the enemy. We attack the mirror instead of changing the face. Dorian's final, fatal act is an attack on the one object that was still telling him the truth, and it is no accident that destroying his honest reflection destroys him. Let me show you how relevant this is. We now live inside systems engineered to keep our public portrait flattering and our honest portrait buried. Algorithms reward the polished, the performed, the enviable. They quietly punish the ordinary truth of a normal day. So we all get gently trained, without ever deciding to, into Dorian's bargain. Show the beautiful face, hide the real portrait. Chase the next hit of validation, the way Dorian chased the next sensation, certain that consequences are something that happens to other, less clever people. And just like him, we are often the last to notice what the chase is doing to us, because we have arranged our whole environment to never show us. What is the way out? Wilde does not spell it out because he was too good an artist to end with a lecture. But the antidote is hidden in the structure of the tragedy itself. Dorian is destroyed by the refusal to integrate, the refusal to let his outer life and inner life be the same life. So the cure is integration. It is the slow, unglamorous, deeply unfashionable work of closing the gap between the self you show and the self you are, not by perfecting the surface, but by being willing to look at the portrait, to let the honest feedback in, to let your face show a little of the truth. The people who seem most at peace are almost never the ones with the most flawless public image. They are the ones whose private portrait and public face have stopped being two different things. I want to add one careful note, because this story can tip a sensitive viewer toward harsh self-judgment, and that is the opposite of the point. Looking at your own portrait honestly is not the same as hating what you see. Dorian swung between flattery and self-loathing and never found the steady middle, which is honest self-compassion, seeing clearly and staying kind. If looking inward only ever produces a verdict of worthlessness, that is not honesty, that is a distortion, and it deserves the same gentle suspicion you would give to a mirror that only ever flatters. The goal is accuracy, held with warmth, not a new and crueler way to grade yourself. Read The Picture of Dorian Gray again, not as a horror story about a haunted painting, but as the most prophetic book about the curated self ever written. It gives you language for the quiet ache of maintaining an image, for the strange loneliness of being admired for a version of you that you know is edited. It asks the question your feed will never ask you. If there were a portrait in your attic that recorded who you actually are, not who you perform, when did you last climb the stairs to look at it? And would you have the courage Dorian never found to look and stay and let it change you instead of breaking the mirror? It is worth naming the loneliness this bargain produces, because it is a very specific and very modern kind. When you are admired for a curated version of yourself, each piece of praise arrives slightly hollow, because some part of you knows it is aimed at the edit and not at you. The more flawless the public portrait, the more isolated the private one becomes, because no one is actually reaching the real person. They are reaching the performance, and a performance cannot be loved, only applauded. Dorian is surrounded by admirers and is utterly alone, and the two facts are not a coincidence, they are the same fact. This is the quiet trap of an optimized image. It can win you an audience while starving you of intimacy, because intimacy requires being seen as you are, portrait and all, and the whole machinery of the curated self is built to prevent exactly that. We are lonelier in the age of the visible self than people were when they were merely unknown, and Wilde would not have been surprised. He understood that to be admired for a mask is a more refined form of solitude than never being seen at all. Tell me in the comments, which do you spend more energy on, the face you show or the portrait underneath? And be honest, the attic is private. If you want more deep dives that turn the stories you think you know inside out, subscribe and check the description for further reading. One honest note before you go. This video uses AI-generated audio and visuals, and it is reflection, not professional advice. If sitting with your own reflection brings up something heavy, that is worth sharing with a person you trust rather than carrying alone. This was just one reader's thoughts, offered to make you think.